at this point you should be able to hear the high whine and the pulsating whine above the sound of the blower motor. As time goes on, this sound will increase significantly, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, when the house is quiet, it sounds like there's a F-18 in your living room. So at this point I'm going to move into the repair phase and begin the process of replacing the draft inducer motor. The first step is to switch off the HVAC system and all power to the Trane XV95. On my particular unit, I have a switch that is right there, and I'm going to switch off the power. I'm now going to remove the lower cover. And raise up and remove the upper cover. And here you can see the draft inducer motor right there. Now this particular unit is probably 10 years old, and with the long winters here in Wisconsin, it gets a lot of use. So this is today's project. Having looked over the connections and requirements for tools, first thing I'm going to do is unplug the electrical. Here's a 4-wire connector right here, and this should match the 4-wire connector right here on the new unit, and it looks like it matches correctly. Over here I'm going to remove these 2 wires here. Actually, there's 2 screws up in here inside using a cross-tip screwdriver, and I'm going to remove this entire connection because there's a plug on the new unit where this goes. So don't remove the wires, let's just unscrew it from the housing, and that comes off. There's a little gasket back here that looks like it's been there since the beginning of the unit. Trying to keep all this together to replace it. Little gasket right here, and 2 small screws right there. Put those out of the way, and now you have this inducer sensor right here, still all attached without pulling the wires off. This is zip tied right here. So I'm going to go get some snippers and cut that zip tie. Be right back. And action. All right, I went and got some snippers needed for cutting the zip tie, and I got the zip ties. So hopefully one less trip to the garage again. All right, we're going to snip the zip tie, being very careful not to nick or cut any of the wires. And now we have the two wiring assemblies, one from the motor itself and one that goes into the side of the motor over here. And we'll move all these out of the way. And now we're ready to remove the motor. We're going to start off by removing the clamp that goes up into this assembly right in here. And then there are 1, 2, 3 screws that actually hold the motor into the housing. One, and there's one all the way back up underneath right here. 2, and another one right down there. You can see it. You also have a hose, a drain hose, and there's a clamp right there to remove to get that hose off. And then this upper clamp right here to get this off. That's our next step. All right, so the first item we'll tackle, I'm using a 5/16 long socket, and an 8mm would probably work well also. This is a screw. All of these screws to remove the motor can be taken off with a flat tip screwdriver. So I've loosened up this clamp here, and I'm just going to raise it up. Make sure it's off of the connection. You may have to open it almost all the way to get enough freedom to get it up and off of the motor, off of this pipe. There's a notch on this pipe here that you actually almost have to open this clamp all the way to get this clamp up above on both sides, just to get it out of the way. I'm sure that's there probably to ensure that the clamp doesn't come back down. Hope you can see that notch in there. There's another one on this side. That notch is right there. You have to get this clamp up above that on both sides. All right, now we're going to start taking off the screws. Upper left. That's what the screws look like. Sheet metal screws. 2. Now for this bottom one, I'm going to transition over to a small socket with this extension. Again, 5/16. And got plenty of room with a small socket down underneath here to get this last screw out. And maybe if you had a long stubby screwdriver, that might be a little easier. But once you get it loose, you can remove it with your hand. All right. So the final item to disconnect is this don't you just love timed lights in your basement storage room? The final item is this hose down here, which has that little clamp right there. So I'm going to monkey with it a little bit, but know that you got to get that off of there with probably some needle nose pliers, or if you have some specialty pliers to get that off of there. You're going to have to disconnect that hose. Be right back. Okay, after a little bit of trial and error and using some mechanical pliers such as this, these were able to get up underneath this little clamp here and remove itself from the hose. And I think I'm going to use a screw clamp when I put this back together, because who knows, hopefully I won't have to replace this anytime soon, but this was a pain in the hiney, this little clamp right here. Not all that great. We'll find a screw clamp for this. Okay, now we are ready to remove the motor, and here it is, right there. There's the motor. And there we go. We're now ready to begin the reinstallation. I want to make sure that the mating surface in here is clean and dry. And it looks like some silicone needs to be put on the back of the transducer motor. This was included with the transducer motor. So I'm going to put a thin bead of silicone here to seal it for where it mates onto this port right here. So what I've done is added a thin bead of silicone sealer that was included. There was a little channel, and I just filled that channel with a sufficient amount of silicone sealer, and that should seal it on the back side where it mates. All right, I've inserted the motor up into this pipe, and then work to make sure that it mates sufficiently on the back side. I can feel it where it's not shifting, and the screw holes are lined up. And now we are going to also attach this small hose at the bottom. It's a little cap that needs to come off, so that's come off. And then I went to Home Depot and purchased a number 6 clamp. And this clamp is replacing this squeeze clamp here, which was painful to get off. So we'll put that on now before we start tightening things down. All right, just to go over a few things. We've reattached all of the screws. 1, 2, and 3. Right back there. We reattached the clamp up here for the pipe. And we've also reattached the drain hose there. And we've replaced that clamp. We replaced that old clamp with now a screw clamp, which was a lot easier to get on. And be sure not to tighten it down too much, because that attachment point is plastic, and you don't want to break that off, and then you have to buy a new motor. So we will continue now hooking up the electrical and get her fired up here. Alright, at this time we're going to reattach this sensor. There's a attachment point right here, and it just simply re-screws back on to this attachment point right there. And as I showed you before, this washer sits on the back here, and it should probably go back on. Hopefully it's not too damaged. But that's the point where it goes on right there. And that is not a cap that comes off, but that's the actual attachment point. It looks the same on the old unit. Alright, at this point now I've reattached the inducer signal right here, and getting those little screws up in there that you can see, I would recommend magnetizing a tip of a screwdriver or using a small telescoping and magnet to get those in there, and then get one started and then start the second one, and then again you don't have to tighten them down too tight, but just snug. And then I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a white shadow in there. That's the felt gasket that is behind there. And so mine was broken on one end, on one corner where the screw hole is, and so I was able to get about a half a thread on both of them and then work it so that it completely seats properly. So we now have this electrical connection done. We now have the drain hose connected with the new clamp. We now have all 3 screws are attached and we now have this upper pipe attached also. So now we're ready to hook up the final connections and energize the system. And we're going to wait to put the zip tie on until we're sure that everything works properly. And now I'm going to come over here to the side and flip the switch. Hear the system energizing. To operate the system without the doors on, you have to put a piece of tape here to keep this switch locked out. And the furnace is calling for heat. I can see the flame is energized and it's producing heat, and the blower should come on shortly. And the fan is coming on. And as you can hear, there's a lot. It's amazing the amount of noise the old one had versus this new one. You can barely hear it. So I think the reason why that this first one failed was, I think it was other than maybe being 10 years old, it might have been getting moisture inside due to a lack of proper draining. And I think that has to do with your drain hoses over here. You can see the two drain hoses that come out of the unit. And if these hoses are blocked in any way, particularly this lower one here, you will definitely have water in the system that's not properly draining. So by all means, ensure that these hoses are free and clear, and you're getting full draining into whatever drain system you have. You should be able to hear the water. This particular system has a humidifier installed with it, so there is water that is providing the moisture for the humidifier, and that's right over here. And so with this system, there is going to be moisture, but any excess has to drain out. And if any of your drain hoses are not clear, then you're definitely going to have problems with your excess moisture that could very well shorten the life of your transducer motor. Small zip tie. Zip tie we're going to shut it off first. Zip tie our electrical back the way we found it. One zip tie there. And we will cut off our excess. This helps to make sure that nothing gets caught in the doors. And all that's left to do is to reinstall the doors. So I hope this was a help to others out there. Like I said, there were a couple of videos that provided enough help to get me going, but I thought I'd try one here just to add a little refinement and some things that I found that help. In terms of what tools took me to complete this job, small ratchet, an extension for a 15/16 socket, Phillips head screwdriver, needle nose pliers, some pliers there to cut your zip tie, and some jaw type pliers there to get that clamp off of the drain hose. So very simple. The only thing I had to go by was, again, that number 6. It's a number 6 screw clamp, 3/8 by 7/8 diameter at Home Depot for 94 cents. So again, the total cost of this job was $373 for the parts, 94 cents for a clamp. When I had asked HVAC guy how much this was going to cost, the part alone was going to run $450 to $500, and then another $175 or so for the installation. Total time for install, assuming you had everything you needed and you were fairly confident, probably an hour, hour and a half, I would say, at the max. Otherwise, it's been a fun project, and I hope this helps other people. Thank you.